Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests tell their story with the help of 12 questions in only 30 minutes. I'm your host, Mike Salitro, and today we are very excited to be joined by Greg Stern. Greg is the owner of From the Ground Up Physiotherapy. He helps people get to the root cause of their pain by teaching them to move their entire body in new ways to wake up sleepy muscles and movement patterns. Rather than solely focusing on the site of the pain, he teaches the body to work as a whole to finally give your site of pain a chance to recover, as it now can work together with your body rather than against it. Greg, welcome. We are really excited to be speaking with you.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, I love that whole body approach. It may sound pretty straightforward and common, but probably is not. So, if you meet someone new, what do you tell them that you do, or how do you explain kind of your approach or your way of thinking when it comes to
Yeah,
fixing
absolutely.
pain?
I like to give people a little bit of a play on words often. People always are, you're a CFO or the chief financial officer. Well, I like to call myself the CFO, but I'm the chief foot officer. So the idea being that from the ground up is all about a holistic ground up approach where we understand the whole body's connected. So I usually just tell people, I help people get to the root cause of their pain by teaching them how to move better. I could contrast that with this idea that most people, when they think about physical therapy or any type of therapy where they're seeking for the therapist to fix them, the idea that I'm going to lay on a table and someone's going to treat the site of pain with their hands, and that somehow I'm going to get better. And so it would be a nice idea that we would just be able to, rub out any sort of pain. But the problem is that most of the time, the pain comes back the moment we stand up from the table because we haven't actually changed what's going on in the body. Whereas my philosophy and the way that I approach my clients is that basically 99% of my session is movement. I don't do that much hands-on therapy, and I get incredible results with people because I rewire someone's nervous system by teaching them how to load their entire body rather than that, let's say, that knee taking on all the load. Well, now the foot, the calf, the hamstring, the quad, all these areas can contribute to the task at hand rather than one area taking on too much pressure.
So that's pretty fascinating, and I'm assuming that are your clients briefed before they start treatment with you? Did they know what to expect, or do they come in thinking this is not like any treatment I've either had before
Well,
or what I expected?
yeah, I guess so. I mean, the thing is, when people come in, it's usually because they've been around the houses. And so, when you're in pain, you're vulnerable and you're ready to make a change. And so, I don't ever get pushback because, people are excited by this idea that, like, okay, I get to take ownership in my process of recovering and healing. Certainly, it may not be for everyone who's ready on their journey or they want a passive approach. And those people that want a passive approach are usually not as they don't get better because they're hoping for someone else to take on, like, their responsibility.
Very nice. And from the ground up is a clever name. Did you come up with it, or what's the story behind that?
No, I was fortunate. My cousin's wife, who is she's a videographer and very creative person. We were sitting down for dinner and she just said from the ground up. I looked at her, I was like, that is incredible. And the thing is, in Quebec, so I'm in Montreal, we have a language police in Quebec. Let me explain that. So
Please.
essentially on a menu, like, French has to be 30% bigger. Every establishment has to have a French name. But because physiotherapy is in French over here, physiotherapy, I get away with it. Plus I trademarked from the ground up, so I'm protected in that way. But she came up with it, and it fits the philosophy perfectly because, I came into this with my own injury, and that's what got me, this foot based approach is something that we don't really appreciate, is our two little flippers we got under our legs.
So tell me about that. What kind of injury did you sustain, and how did that kind of shape what you're doing with your life?
Yeah, so 10 years ago now, I was just playing, I'm a big flag football player. Montreal actually is the biggest flag football league in the world, fun fact. And I sprained my ankle playing football. And up to that point, I had so many injuries in my life. I broke tons of bones in my body. I was getting lacerations 24/7. Like, I was just always a wild kid. But this injury was different. It wasn't one that I hurt my bone or whatever it is, and 6 weeks later I'm back to playing my sports. The injury was just an innocent ankle sprain that I rolled my ankle more on the inside than the outside, which is less common. Anyway, my ankle just never felt the same afterwards. I ended up starting to do physiotherapy myself, thinking it would just go away, just like any of my other issues. But the injury lingered on and lingered on. So for 2.5 years, I was dealing with pain in my foot where I couldn't stand barefoot for more than a few seconds without a buzzing discomfort. I started to feel off in the rest of my body, and I was going around from one physiotherapist to the next, trying to figure out what was going on, and nothing really was helping me. So I ended up getting orthotics. I ended up getting orthopedic shoes. And eventually I ended up getting surgery on my ankle. And I woke up thinking like all my problems would be over. But in fact, my problems compounded and I started getting hip pain and back pain that started becoming chronic themselves. And so I was completely broken. And I'm 29 now, I'm turning 30 in a week. But so like at the age of 19 to like 24, 25, 26, I'm dealing with pain all the time and I'm feeling broken. I'm pretty depressed at this point. And I knew I needed to take a deep dive to understand like whatever is being offered to me is not getting to the root of my problem. And so I started to seek outside the confines of traditional education and was going to workshops and seminars and trying to find out like who knows about the foot because I want to learn from that person. And rabbit hole after rabbit hole, I start to come up with a system of applying work on myself. And eventually I start to get better. And I was at a point where I couldn't stand barefoot for more than 10 seconds. And now I'm hiking barefoot. I can slackline. I could do all the things I want to do. And I own a clinic that's all about foot health and how the feet impact the rest of the body. So that was my journey with pain and persevering through it.
That's quite a place to come from not being able to stand barefooted to doing strenuous activities like hiking barefoot.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that people do more things barefoot, or are we how should we figure that part out?
Yeah. Well, just think about it this way. It's a simple word called evolution. And where do we come from? We came from evolved to be barefoot with our feet on the ground or connected to the ground for the most time. Now, I recognize our environments are different than they were back then, but most people kind of have this disconnection between their feet. They think of their feet like a piece of meat that goes inside of their shoes and they forget about them for the rest of the day. But our feet are extremely complex. We got a foot over here. We have 26 bones in each foot, 33 joints, 19 muscles connecting to our feet. They're very, very complicated structures with hundreds of thousands of nerve endings. And what do we do to them? We stick them inside of like compressed shoes that have a massive slab of cushioning, that don't move very much. And we start to wonder why our feet start to be in pain. But if we look back to it, like as a child, we think about like playing barefoot, but then as soon as we start to do any athletic activities or go out into the world, we're constantly inside of shoes that don't let our feet function the way that nature intended. And so there's a whole now movement towards what's called like minimalist or natural or barefoot shoes. But the whole idea is that a shoe should just protect your foot, but not impose on your foot. So I got like different shoes that allow fully bendy, twisty, that have much wider toe boxes than traditional conventional footwear like Asics, New Balance, Nike. All the shoes that everyone's wearing are too narrow at the toes. They elevate your heel so that you're now no longer vertically aligned. They don't allow for movement. And so our feet that should be able to support our body and be strong all of a sudden don't work the way that they're supposed to, and from the ground up type of idea that, well, now your knees take on too much load, your back is working too much. And so going slowly and surely by just starting to go into your backyard and spend some time on the grass could be an easy way for people to start.
I want to follow up on that, but you mentioned a couple times having pain that goes up your leg to your knee, your back, or having subsequent areas based on the foot pain.
Yeah.
If for someone who's encountering pain in multiple parts of their body, how can they figure out kind of the root cause or figure out what the main thing they should treat is to alleviate multiple sources, or how do you help them figure that out?
Well, I mean, I have an assessment process that's pretty simple. Like, honestly, I'm just asking someone to bend down to touch their toes, to side bend, to twist, to lean back. And already from that little bit of information, I understand like where someone's shying away from. Like, let's say they had an old ankle injury. Now, all of a sudden, like when I ask them to bend one way, do they like, are they happy to move in that direction? And then I'm getting them on my like a treatment table and I'm looking at the way that like certain ranges of motion, but obviously like, would require either someone to get assessed by me. I have a program, we could chat about that. But the whole idea is that like I want to see someone's current movement picture, but how do I get to the root cause of the pain? Well, ultimately, the simplest understanding is a stacked body. Now, what does a stacked body mean? Imagine you were going to start a race. So imagine your right foot is forward. Would you start a race leaning back or leaning forward?
Probably leaning forward.
Leaning forward, right? So when I do that and I lean, well, so that's an obvious answer. But what the reality is when I ask someone to, put one leg forward and bend their knee, what happens to most people's bodies is their rib cage falls backwards. So what do you think that's loading right now? My lower back, not my leg. So one of the key principles that I teach is, okay, imagine you have 1 foot forward, the back leg is like allowed 1% of your weight. Now I want you to like stay tall and then just shift your weight forward in space. So all of a sudden, what's going to happen is that the weight is going to now come onto the midfoot and the forefoot, and the leg turns on like that. And this is a new space for most people's bodies because they're not used to being loaded in this like active way. Just think about this way. I'm in Montreal and the car is stuck in the snow. How am I going to push it? I'm going to get my body and lean forward, right? So we start to, or think about a tennis player that's bouncing on their midfoot and their foot, or forefoot on their toes. So we want to learn how to get our body more forward. And then I could now introduce movement to their body, like learning to bend and side bend or whatever, exploring 3D movement. So when it comes to getting to the root cause of pain, all I'm doing is I'm essentially stacking someone's body. And then, okay, for example, they didn't want to twist right. Well, now I'm going to twist right. And instead of them feeling their lower back working, all of a sudden they feel their glutes light up in a different way that they've never felt before. And very quickly, pain can go away. So it's a matter of just how do they determine? Well, I mean, it's again like guided by someone who knows what they're talking about and is not going to just poke and prod at you, expecting that to be the solution to your problem.
Okay, so that's descriptive, is the way that you kind of walk through it, and it's helpful to kind of think of if I'm trying to be ginger on how I move my body, am I moving in the right direction, or what kind of cues are you looking for to help people diagnose that? So that's very helpful to hear. And then kind of going back to the barefoot walking and just being, what other things besides wearing shoes that might be too tight are we doing every day that might keep us from our max health or having our body at a top peak?
Well, I think one of the things that's something that we're both doing right now is something called sitting. And I don't think the devil is sitting, it's how we sit. For example, sitting on the floor is a lot better than sitting in a chair. And why sitting on the floor better, for example? Because naturally what happens after a few minutes of sitting on a floor is your body becomes a little uncomfortable. And so you change positions. But the problem is when you sit in your $500, lazy boy chair, the problem is that like you never get the signal to change. And so we're in like one position all day. But I would say that even worse than that is that we've all been indoctrinated to believe that when we sit, we need to sit in erect, good posture. Chest up, sit up straight, keep your shoulders down and back. Now, why is that bad? Because we've all been told that's good, right? Like that's good posture. Well, I invite anyone who's listening right now to take your hands and squeeze your hands together as hard as you can. So you're going to go for about 5 seconds. You're going to squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Okay. Now, if I ask you to do that for the next 12 hours, you're going to screw off, like impossible. But the thing is, when we sit up straight, what are we doing to our lower back? We're squeezing and engaging those muscles. Now, I had the opportunity to visit India 10 years ago, and I saw 80-year-olds there that are able to do a deep astagra squat, i.e., the ability to fully sit into a deep squat position. Now, most 25-year-olds struggle to do that in North America. But in India, China, lots of East Asian countries, people can do that. Now, it's not because they have more special hips than us. It's just the fact that their culture promotes squatting all the time. So in that posture of a deep squat, their low back is rounded and relaxed, not straight like we sit. So why is it that when we sit on a chair, we don't allow ourselves to slouch, allowing our back to completely relax? And it goes against aesthetics, but we get happier backs when we allow our backs to fully chill out as opposed to being in this chest up posture. So I know it goes against what we've all been told, that we should be in this like good posture, but if you actually find the back of your butt and let your ribs come down, it feels a lot nicer on your back. And that's what we should be doing if we're sitting for 10 hours a day. So that's, I guess, a huge element, is that we're just always in tension. We're fighting tension with more tension, and we need to learn how to just ease our bodies.
That's really good, especially when you kind of use the hand as a fist example. That of course it's going to be putting a lot of strain on an area that you definitely wouldn't do it for 12 hours. So why would you do
Yeah,
that to your
exactly.
back?
But we kind of want to do that in our backs, unfortunately.
So and then sitting up, sitting up straight, sitting up proper is the other thing that, yeah, of course that makes sense. What else are we doing wrong that, tomorrow I should stop doing this and start doing this instead?
Well, I mean, that we could compound that and say that when we go to the gym, we're often cued to pop our chest up. So I wouldn't want that. Like, let's say I was about to start a race. My first movement wouldn't be up, it would be forward. So oftentimes when we go and we do squats and deadlifts and all the things that people do in the gym, they're often cued to pop their chest up. And so they're engaging their lower back as the primary mover. Whereas I would like them to be able to think about more pushing through the floor and using their legs. So I think in general, when we go to the gym, we're often cued this idea of squeeze your glutes, squeeze your core. Whereas I would want to promote more people to be more fluid in their movements in the gym. Instead of bicep curls where nothing moves, why don't you encourage your body to move? Because when we walk, our body does move. So I think there's a lot of indoctrination again behind like certain training principles of stiffness and stability. But when we create stability and rigidity, we end up creating a stiff spine when it comes to moving outside the gym. So we often are trying to get fit when we go to the gym, but we're making ourselves stiffer. So going and promoting like a lot more unilateral training, i.e., train with your left leg forward and your right leg forward, versus your main bit of your programming always being 2 arms at a time and 2 legs at a time. It's much more interesting to do more alternating motions, which allow the rib cage to move, which is exactly what happens when we walk and when we run. Go look at a dog's spine, how they walk and move. Super fluid. But for whatever reason, we're trying to outsmart our natural movements and we stiffen ourselves up as a result.
Okay. Got a lot of things I got to do differently. So thank you for that. You tell your story as a 19, 20-year-old who had severe injury that was chronic, wouldn't go away. And it really kind of exemplifies how you got started. Do you have a kind of go-to story that you'll share with a patient or a client of yours that, this person came in with this, we tried XYZ, and now here's what they're doing? Is there a story you go to when you kind of want to tell somebody about what you've done?
I think I could give several stories. I mean, one that's interesting to note is that, I had a client that was dealing with foot numbness for 3 years. She
Wow.
went to doctors, neurologist, the neurologist sends her to podiatrist, the podiatrist sends her back to a neurologist. Everyone's scrambling in circles and they're all doing the normal tests. Everything comes back normal. But modern medicine often tries to complicate things. It was very simple. I got her barefoot. I got her to use something called an acupressure mat. I got her in toe spreaders, which like allow the toes to spread out. I have them here. Little toe spreaders. So basically getting the bones of the feet to spread out. And I just got her stacking and using her legs. 3 weeks later, 3 years of foot numbness goes away. It's just use it or lose it. Why do the doctors, they're trying to find like, the magic assessment, but it's just comes down to using our bodies the way that nature intended. Another example, I had a guy with 6 years of back pain and his doctors told him what not to do, what not to do, and what not to do. Fear, fear, fear. You know what we know about the placebo effect is super powerful. Well, the nocebo effect works the same way. A negative advice or whatever, like what you creates the same type of or whatever advice gives a negative consequence to the body. And so after 6 years of dealing with pain, he came to me. I got him to slouch. I got him to use his legs again. And within a few weeks, or well, I think maybe 6, 8 weeks, his pain was gone and he had been around the houses. So I think the point to make is that chronic pain, like our bodies have an innate capacity to heal if we create the right environment to allow it to. And so often we say in the medical system, it's like, all right, you're gonna have to learn to live with this. And so you just create this like sense of like, well, you're not giving that person hope. The mindset is half the battle when it comes to changing our behaviors and healing. And if we believe we could heal, we can heal. If we believe we're not going to heal, we're not going to heal. So it's part of just reframing the way that we see pain it's a guide to guide us to a better place, not to kill the pain, but rather to listen to the pain.
So I'd never heard the term nocebo before, so I'm going to give you credit for inventing that. I love that.
It's not a no, it's not a fake word.
Okay.
Just check it out afterwards.
uh, but the positive mindset piece, how important do you see that as being a component of recovery, to have the just the understanding that this is working for me, this is what I want to do, as opposed to I'm afraid I shouldn't do this, or I can't do that, or this is wrong?
Yeah, well, I think, my job is to help, is to give people permission to explore their bodies again. Obviously, if something feels painful, we want to modify for it to not feel painful. It's not no pain, no gain, but the idea is, exploration. But in terms of them, I think it's very important that they take ownership in their process of healing, not a fix me type of attitude. And oftentimes people are desperate, or that's just how our indoctrinated societal belief is, that like, all right, quick fix solution, like, rub it here and then you'll go away. And so I think if people all of a sudden say, oh my God, this exercise feels hard, and they're like, well, if you practice it a few, and put in the reps in practice, all of a sudden it doesn't feel as hard. Well, now they start to feel more empowered to what's next, the next challenge. So, I always tell people, like, my job is not to get you out of pain. My job is to help you build resilience, capacity, new skills that you could use in your life, so that, like, 6 months from now, if you feel like a little bit of pain come back, you don't need to like all of a sudden ring me up. Like, go back into the debrief that I sent you and explore it. For sure, I'm here to be your guide always. But the whole idea is that you're learning new skills that like are not just to use for the moment that you're in pain, but actually to continue to use, so that you continue to build strength through the whole body.
That makes sense, and that's good to have those kind of having the mind work together with the body. That's the way, that's the best way to do it, and it goes hand in hand with from the ground up, kind of thinking of it holistically. The other thing I jotted down here is you mentioned a podiatrist. You're a physiotherapist. If I am in pain, how do I know who to go see, and how do your patients find you?
Well, I would say, so podiatrists are usually those that are dealing with foot pain issues. And what I will say again, and I'm not ever gonna call like one industry bad, so to say, but what I'll say is that when someone's trained to use a hammer, they're going to use a hammer. Now, most podiatrists that I've come to experience through like dealing with lots and lots of clients, and I actually wore orthotics myself for 5 years, is that most podiatrists see the foot as like, all right, we need to create some sort of support system for the foot. And in my opinion, that's taking a very reductionist approach to the way that we should see. It's like, all right, if you came to me with a neck problem and I just stuck a brace on your neck, would you expect your neck pain to get better for the long term if I just blocked your movement from taking place?
Probably not.
Well, why do we apply that logic to our feet? It's no different. So I think that orthotics could be a tool, but they're not a solution. So if you need to temporarily offload the foot while working on getting the foot stronger and moving better, great, use an orthotic. But otherwise, if we're saying that that's the solution, that's not a solution. That's actually what it's doing. Is one of the reasons most people, I guess, many reasons, I'm not speaking English right now, it's the end of the day. A lot of people have pain in their feet because they're stiff and they're weak feet. Okay, they have stiff and weak feet because they're inside of shoes that don't let them move. Now let's take a stiff and weak foot and put an orthotic on it. What is that going to do? It's going to make the foot stiffer and weaker. So we're compounding the problem and just kind of kicking the tire down the line. So how do people know who to see when they have pain? That was your original question. Well, you want to find a practitioner that's going to empower you to take responsibility of your health. That's basically going to be a glorified personal trainer that understands biomechanics really well and is going to teach you how to move your body so that you could get back to doing the things you want to do. If all you're doing is lying on a table, doing very isolated exercises and being rubbed and using electrotherapy and heat pads and all the things that people often receive, you're not working with the right practitioner because all you're doing is treating the symptoms. So, unfortunately, I don't think the standard of care in the industry is that high. I think you have to kind of dig deep and find people that say, wow, this is a different approach. And those are the types of people you want to look for.
So that's a really good answer because you kind of walk through where we started, that there's a root cause and there's a symptom. And if you treat the symptoms, perhaps you might have relief. It might be temporary, but if you identify the root cause, you can just remove the problem. So so it's a really good kind of example of how you do that. The other thing I thought of as you were describing that, going back to the example of not being able to fully bend or to have that kind of motion, that do you often hear, well, I'm not flexible, or that's just my body, I can't do those things, and that's it, like there's nothing that can be done about it, when it does not sound like that's actually the case, that it's our lack of movement gets us to a place that we don't even want to explore where we could go.
Yeah, trust me, you'll understand when you get to my age, I hear, or I'm not flexible. And then, like, within 2 sessions, they're touching their toes for the first time in their life. Again, let's say, so like, imagine you wanted to touch your toes, right? So for whatever reason, we always think that we need to touch our toes with our knees fully locked out. And I would say that's not the case, because as I mentioned, that doesn't stack our body. If we're usually doing that, we're all on our heels. So what I invite people to do is, like, go ahead and try to touch your toes with your head fully relaxed. Okay. And then bend your knees and shift your weight to the point where your heels feel like they're about to come off the floor. And all of a sudden, you're going to be able to touch the floor. Now, yeah, oh, well, that's cheating. Well, it's not cheating. Now you're lengthening the muscle in a way it wants to get lengthened. So everyone that's trying to stretch out their hamstrings and they feel like they're never making any progress, it's because you're tugging on a muscle in a way that doesn't want to get tugged on. And if you just bend your knees a bit, shift your weight forward and touch your toes. Now, when you stand up, what I would like you to think about is, like, don't stand up by lifting through your chest. Keep yourself like a caveman, nice and slouchy, and think about, as you come back up, your hips hump forward rather than lifting through your chest. And all of a sudden, you're going to start getting a lot of length in your hamstrings. So it's just the strategies that people have been trying their whole life that have been the problem, not the fact that they're inflexible. Sure, they might have inflexible bodies, but we can make people more flexible pretty quickly by using more effective, like, stretching strategies, because I'm not a big fan of static stretching. It's more about dynamic movements that create length that, like, we could click control save on, rather than just hoping that me reaching for my toes is going to actually make a long-term change.
Yeah, as you describe what the muscles or what the body wants, it's kind of, if you kind of use running as an example, if you want to run 10 miles, your body's not probably going to let you do that right away. You have to kind of build up to it. And same with the stretching, that
Yeah.
there's something your muscle will accept and it will grow over time. So it's helpful to hear it that way. Your face lights up as you talk about this, so I can clearly see this is your passion. Uh, do you what do you do to kind of get away, or to, when you're not helping others and you're not kind of thinking about this stuff, how do you unwind?
Nature. That's definitely my needed respite is heading into there in Montreal. There's something called Mount Royal, just a big mountain in the middle of the city. So I'm out in nature doing hikes or just hanging out with friends. I do something called the rope flow, which is a very cool practice. Instead of skipping rope, imagine taking a rope and now moving it to the side, like almost like a lightsaber, where I ended up creating like figure of eight patterns. And so your body really goes into this very big flow state. So I like to get outside, do some rope flow, slackline. I'm constantly moving. I think I'm in a movement addiction or whatever. I just like constantly walking about and do my thing. But I mean, look, I'm 3.5 years into business, and I'm obviously uh I saw 8 clients today, and now we're recording a podcast that night. So I'm happy to put in the grind. I think an important point to note is like the understanding of making a choice. Like I'm choosing to do this, and certain days I don't want to choose to do this. So it's like a matter of like aligning my schedule. Okay, if I'm just packing clients and I'm like saying, shit, I don't want to do this at the end of the day, like that's different than like, all right, like shifting mindset around like, all right, I'm choosing to see, oh, and the day where I'm too busy, like I'm my own boss. So like I take time off as I need, and that's the nice thing for sure. But yeah, I think that's kind of the answer to that.
That's that the nature and the rope flow as you describe it kind of goes perfectly hand in hand with how you kind of look at movement and
Yeah,
being good for the body. And
yeah,
again,
yeah.
that holistic, I want to be able to have the fluid motion in what I do. So that makes a lot of sense. Uh, where can our listeners find you? Where can they connect if they want
Yeah,
to come see
absolutely.
you?
So the name of the company again is From the Ground Up Physiotherapy. But if people look up Ground Up Physio, PHYSIO, they could find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all that jazz. But what I would recommend for people is, I have a free guide that people could grab and start to understand these principles I'm discussing. Obviously, movement is very like you need to feel it. So as I'm describing things, it sounds very theoretical. So I have a free guide, and that leads into an online mobility program that I created that basically teaches the exact same system that I teach to my one-on-one clients, the same progressive model where like we'll start slow, and as we get better at these slow movements, we add dynamic, we start adding the element of like leaving the ground, which is very important. But the whole idea is these are very simple, easy to follow along exercises that are like shown by video that you could do in the comfort of your own home without any like equipment whatsoever. And that's available for someone who's just feels like they're feeling too old in their body compared to their actual age. They feel like their body is like breaking down faster than it should. And it's all the same things that I learned that help my own body. So this is like a compilation of a lot of my mentors and my own kind of interpretation of how I've like my system that I do with my clients. And it gets people very, very profound results. So I feel like if people are interested in exploring this world, I have tons of free online content that you could explore. But if you want a more guided approach, I'm certainly happy to have you on board, and there's a whole community around that to support people on their journeys.
Awesome. So we will post all of that. Greg, this has been a blast. I am known for jumping around and not having a to Z type conversation. So I will end here. Is there anything I didn't ask you tonight that I probably should have?
Um, I would just say, as we're coming to a close, one thing that people could focus on is that we're in a stressed out, crazy world that we're living in right now. Instead of people thinking about a deep breath where they're sniffing and pulling a lot of air, one thing we could all do instead of, you know, quieting our inhale and actually lengthening our exhale. So, and really prolonging our breath allows our bodies to relax more. So, there's very cool studies showing long exhales decrease our blood pressure. So, like, with all the things that are outside of your control, focus on your breath. That's a huge thing that I do with my clients to get people's bodies kind of down regulate a bit before bed, or even just to assimilate the work that I want to do with them. So as we come to a close, and oh my God, there's a lot going on. These are a lot of new concepts. What are you talking about with feet and shoes and all this stuff? I know it's different, but different is good, because that's what most people, this is very different. Well, often people are saying, well, this is different. I'm like, well, how's your body feeling right now? Well, pretty crappy. So I think we should try a different approach, one in which we learn to use our whole body effectively, understand that our ribs are supposed to come down and come up when we breathe. Our body are supposed to move fluidly instead of stiff and rigid, like we've all been taught about core tight. So, I guess I'll finish with that note.
That's a perfect place to end, because it really wraps up everything we talked about, from having a simple, straightforward approach, something that we can actually do, uh, maintain our breathing, take a longer exhale, and how it can have a profound effect on bigger parts or other parts of our body as well. Blood pressure, as you mentioned, your overall health. So
Yeah.
this has been a blast, Greg. We will post everything that we talked about. Thank you so much for joining us, and I do look forward to doing it again.
Sounds great. Thank you.